Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're sitting. I hope you can hear me well. So my name is Patrick. I work at Google, and I've been working on the Gerrit project since 2016. And it is my pleasure today to give this talk to you, which is sort of the second part of this whole CI strategy that we've developed for Gerrit. The first part you just saw Ben and Delphine talk about. And I've heard one question in the previous talk that was about, can we also block submission when the CI results are negative? And this is the best segue into this talk. So thanks to the person who asked this question, this is what I'm talking about now. So 2 years ago or so, we sat together, Ben, Elise, Hanwin, and I, and thought about what could we do to improve the CI integration in Gerrit. And we came up with this two-pillar strategy. So one is we want to backfeed the results to the user directly from the CI system, so that there is no latency and the results can be rich. And we also established a back channel, as Ben told you about, so the user can actually trigger actions on the CI system. And the second pillar of this integration is we want to improve the integration of CI systems into making changes blocking away from Prolog and from labels. So today I'll talk about the problem space. I'll talk about the composable submit requirements, which is our approach to solving this configurability problem. And I'll show you a demo of what we've been working on, and we'll close off with a Q&A. Okay, so these are the two pillars I briefly chatted about, and this talk is focusing on the submit requirements. So previously, if you want to make a change block on something in Gerrit, there were 3 different items you could use. So the first one is you could use label functions. These are probably the most common ones. So you configure a label in project.config, and then you set up a function like maximus block, meaning you need the maximum positive vote and you must not have the maximum negative vote in order to make the change submittable. There are use cases where this level of flexibility isn't enough. So Android, for example, has very complicated rules because they have a lot of repositories with a lot of different use cases that they need to work with, and that they need to work for developers to make that work. And so they've written Prolog, and in fact, they've written hundreds of lines of Prolog. Used to be Gerrit's answer for how can we allow the maximum amount of flexibility for people to configure what makes their changes submittable. And so you can just write code, right? Prolog is a coding language, so you can write code to define what makes your changes submittable. And the third pillar we came up with maybe 4 years ago was our first approach to a more streamlined way of setting this up, and it was the submit rules interface. So the submit rules interface allowed people to write plugins, Java plugins that is, and then inside the Java plugins, they could write Java code, and as they give the result back to Gerrit's core, they could say, yes, this change is submittable, or no, this change is not submittable. That also allowed for flexibility. It was in ways nicer than Prolog, and in other ways it wasn't, because you actually needed to build a plugin, and it left a lot of flexibility to the owners, which also put burden on them. Meaning, if you were to implement such a plugin, you would actually have to think yourself about when is this submit rule applicable. It would always be called from the main code, so you have to configure it yourself. Okay, so we looked at this from 2 different angles, this problem space. The first one is, what are the pain points for administrators? And the second is, what are the pain points for users? So the pain points for administrators is that if the standard set of functions and labels isn't enough for you, then you basically have to write Prolog. If I look at the latest Stack Overflow survey of what languages developers prefer, Prolog is not in the top 30. And that tells a story, I think. So some organizations have Prolog geniuses, and I bow to their wisdom. but most don't. And so what that means is they have to go to the Gerrit cookbook, and then they have to learn Prolog, and they stick things together, and hopefully it works, but it's quite a frustrating experience. And oftentimes they reach out to us, being us, the people at Google, or us, the Repo Discuss mailing list, for advice. And then we are also like, what can we do about it? We can't really give offhand guidance. We have to look into each case individually. It's quite cumbersome. The submittable, as I said, on the other side, had a lack of flexibility. So you couldn't cover all the use cases, the composition was unclear, and so on. So what is the integration looking like today in Gerrit? So most hosts ship with two labels. You have the code review label, and you have the verified label. And for a lot of cases, that's enough. But as I said, people or projects like the Android project, they have very distinctive needs on when their changes can be submitted. So this shows a screenshot from the Android open source project, and you can see it's a gazillion of labels. It's, I don't know, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12 labels or so. So as a user, this is the other part. It's hard to understand what makes this change submittable. Do I just need a code review? Well, I already have a +1. Is that enough? Why is that not enough? What does code owners mean here? What is pre-submit verified? Why is auto-submit in the same list than a global approval? And what is a global approval? So a lot of questions are left for the user to think about without actually giving guidance on what's going on. At the same time, if you have a host that is covering a variety of cases, that means you have a variety of different labels within each project. There might be some overlapping, but overall, it's just a large list of labels on your host. Now, if you look at the dashboard is covering all the repos on the host. And so that means whatever list of labels you have, you'll see that on the dashboard. Leading to dashboards like this, where if you're a power user, I guess you know what you're looking at. You look at the different columns very specifically, and maybe you've muscle trained your eye for that. But apart from that, it's actually quite hard to see what is going on and to see if a change is submittable or not. Okay, so to summarize the user pain points, it is hard to see what makes a change submittable. Why is it not submittable? What is left to do for the author, but also for the reviewer. So for the reviewer, I want to know what I can do to help move this change forward, which is also not addressed. So that is the problem space, and that brings me to this new design. By now, we've sort of seen that the problem space previously with Prolog allowed for a lot of flexibility. So with Prolog, you could address all of the cases I just showed you, but it's hard to do, but it's possible. So there is a need for flexibility. And at the same time, there is a need to address user pain points in the UI with a better user experience. This is what we are trying with Composable submit requirements. So there is two parts of this project. There is backend redesign, and there is a UX redesign. So for the backend redesign, we wanted to go with something very simple, yet very flexible. And if you think about Gerrit today, then we have that already. So if you look at the top right, there is a search bar. And the search bar is quite simple. Users use it every day. It has auto completions. I think it's quite simple to use. Yet it's very flexible because you can define a query that matches very specifically a set of changes. And we got inspired by that and borrowed that query language for the backend redesign. And so I'll show you a full set of configuration on the next slide, but it's basically borrowing the change queries, making them work for submit requirements. And on the UX side, we just want to give more clarity to users, and I'll show you how we did that. Okay, so we define a submit requirement to be 4 things. First, it has a name, quite simple. So for example, we say we have a submit requirement that's called code review. We give it a description. So we say at least 1 maximum vote for label code review is required. You can be very verbose here. You can put multi-line descriptions, and I'll show you in the UI how this renders, but it's a place to really explain to the user what is happening. And then we have 3 different conditions and 1 override. So we define 3 different queries. So the first query is called submittable if. So a submit requirement is submittable if this predicate turns true. So I could say, I want to have a label with code review equals max. User is non-uploader. So that will turn true whenever I have a code review label with +2 in my case, given by a non-author. And at the same time, I must not have a code review label at the minimum voting range. So this is actually mirroring the function called maximum block. The next condition is applicable if. So you can see this in the verified example here. You can define requirements that are applicable only to some changes. And the benefit of that is you can be very granular and very rich with requirements without confusing the users on the UI. So for example, we have the library compliance submit requirement in Gerrit. You can see it as the 3rd one here in the list. And that is only applicable if you change, if you make changes that have an impact on the license. So for example, if you update a dependency of Gerrit, that update might actually entail that we have a new license that is brought into the project through that dependency. So we need extra reviews. And you don't want to have this requirement pop into users' faces when it's not applicable, because it's just a waste of space, it's a waste of mental energy to look at this. So most of the changes will not surface this requirement. And so here we say, this is not applicable to the rev.config branch, so to the config branch in Gerrit. And it's also only applicable if you change anything in a library folder, or if you change anything in the workspace file. If not, this whole thing isn't shown. And there is a 3rd condition, not shown here, but it's very similar to the other 2 conditions to discuss if. So we distinguish between 3 states. The submit requirement can be not applicable, so it's not shown. If it's applicable, we evaluate the submittable condition. Now, if that is false, we show it and we say, oh, this change is blocked in this requirement. And we also have defined an override path. And the override path is the non-normal path. So what could you do in exceptional situations to get this change submitted? And the most prominent example here is if your team is running a DevOps rotation and the DevOps engineer has to sort of merge changes on their own blessing, then this is a way how you can model this. So you can give this on-duty engineer the power to just merge all the changes, bypassing review, for example, and then have people look at this later when the fire has been extinguished, the outage has been mitigated, or something like that. Okay, so this was the first part, the configuration part, and now we're moving into the UI. So on the UI, we really try to be, for once, condensed and focused on why is this change not submittable. But then if you hover, you will actually see more information, and we're more verbose, and we try to really give a holistic opinion on why this requirement specifically is blocking. So what you can see here is the new UI. We've modeled different requirements into this mock, and this change is not submittable because it has no code review. Actually, it has negative votes in the code review. Code owners haven't signed off yet. The pre-submit checks, so CI came back negative, and the linter came back negative, and so on. And you can see something else here. So we make a distinction between what is blocking submission, so all of these submit requirements, and other votes on the change. So we found out that Gerrit's voting and label system is really flexible, and it has a low entry barrier. So it actually makes it so that people use it for other things that aren't making changes submittable or not submittable. A practical example for this is AutoMerger. So some installations have an AutoMerger plugin, and they have a label called AutoMerge, and if you vote +1 on it, then once CI comes back with a positive result and you have the code review labels, Gerrit will just merge the change automatically for you. Now, we call these things trigger votes or triggers, and we serve them down there in the UI, so that we really make this distinction of, hey, this is blocking and this is other state that is related to the change. Okay, enough of the theory and onto a demo. So before this user summit, we've rolled out the new UI to the Gerrit host. So if you visit the Gerrit host right now, you don't have to be signed in. You can see the new UI, and you can also see the new backend in action. So this is what it looks like in the dashboard. It's all work in progress. So icons, for example, are expected to change once more, a little bit of modifications here and there. The first thing that sort of jumps to my eye is that we've cleaned up this space on the right. So we've decided that the code review is the most important piece out of all the requirements. So we want to extract it out and put it here. And the rest of the requirements we just show as a summary. And so you can hover here and you see code review is not fulfilled, verified is not fulfilled, and code style is not fulfilled. That is true for most of the changes except a change in plugin hooks that is ready to go. The second layer we've worked on is the change page. So we've been trying to clean up the change page as a whole, and also the submit requirements effort is blowing into that same horn. So what you see here is the new submit requirements pane. We have 3 requirements on the Gerrit hosts. Everyone who's working on the project knows that. And the first example, this change, we have different votes. And we're showing the votes grouped to the requirements. And for the code review votes, we're also showing them next to the reviewers because we think they are the single most important set of votes. So we've negative and positive votes for code review, so the requirement is not fulfilled. Now, as a user, you might think, especially as a new user, I have a positive vote. Why is this not fulfilled? What else do I need? So you can mouse over this, and you'll see the overlay. And so the overlay says code review unsatisfied, and the list of people who voted with their values. It also shows you the voting power of people. So Gerrit CI, for example, is not a maintainer, so it can only vote -1, +1. And this helps you to understand what can be done to unblock this. Here is the description we've entered here. It says at least 1 maximum vote for code review is required. And we hope that this is enough for most users and that service owners or administrators are verbose enough in their human readable description. But in some cases, it might not be. So here we say at least 1 maximum vote for a label code review is required. And if this doesn't give you the right information, you can actually look at the config right away. And so the config is the same language as the query language we use on the top right. So we do think it's parsable for users if need be. Usually they would prefer the description, but if they have to read and understand this, then we're pretty confident they will. The next thing is the verified vote. So for us, we have this new beautiful checks integration that Ben and Delphine downloaded, and we wanted to tightly integrate submit requirements with it. And so this integration, you can see here, the checks came back negative here. So checker voted -1. And I can click here and it brings me directly to the checks tab. And I can see what failed. I see that build tests failed while code style passed. And I can also use this link to go to the CI system directly and see what is wrong, work on it, and hopefully fix it. Okay, so What else is there to be done in the future? So this is sort of a snapshot. This is all in active development. We plan a couple of things for the next releases. One is we want to integrate with actions. So we've made we've had a good feedback for quick actions generally on the UI, and so here we want to offer quick actions as well. So down there you can expect a button that, for example, would vote code view +2, or if you have an override path configured, you could also, for example, have a button here that says override, and that would then process the override. What else is there to do? So we want this place to be the holistic place for deciding why a change is not submittable. And submit requirements is only one part. The other part is the change mergeable on the Git layer? Is the change part of a topic, and are all the other changes in the topic submittable? And sort of all this information we want to surface in this place as submit requirements as we go. So that in the future, the users can just turn to this one UI part and see what is going on. Awesome, so far for the demo. I really encourage you to go to the Gerrit host maybe today or tomorrow and just play around with this. We've set it live for everyone on the host, so definitely do that. Awesome. Actually, the last slide is giving credits. So this was a joint project where many people contributed a lot of their time and energy. So Delphine did the UX design and research, Valentin worked on the front end, Youssef worked on the back end, Edwin did a lot of great reviews, and I helped a little bit as well. So thank you to everyone on the team for launching this and also making it available for the summit. And thank you specifically to Youssef and to Delphine, from whom I borrowed some of the slides. They gave a previous talk about this, and some of the slides were borrowed from there. Will Prolog be missed? Hi, Maxime, nice to see you. So will Prolog be missed? I think not. So I looked at the Stack Overflow survey, as I said, and it's not in there. So everyone I talk to is not sad to see it go.
If I use already Prolog in my projects and I want to keep on using for the future, will I still be able to use it for the foreseeable future?
Yes, you will. So we actually built an adapter. So all the existing output of Prolog is transformed and converted into this new UI. It's not as rich, of course, because we don't have the different conditions, but it is working, and it is working on the new UI as well. So we're not breaking the use case. We hope that the new system is good enough that it convinces even the hardest Prolog fan to move over at some point.